The U.S. is worried that the IDF is not ready to go with achievable plans for Gaza, like the day after.
Who's reporting that? Do you believe that?
Well,
because I feel like IDF, all we've heard is how powerful they are.
Right, and then they have a 3-star general advising them for this insurgency. Well, the Marine general's not going to be there long. So I don't know. I always thought that Israel wrote the book on things like this, and that we were getting ramped up to speed during the years in Iraq and Afghanistan. But we could just go by what's going on behind closed doors. So far, it seems we seem to be keeping a tight leash on them.
You know, Trey is right, though, because there are these stories with different kind of angles. You got the New York Times that says that essentially Israeli officials have not yet decided whether or not to launch the surgical attack or the ground the ground invasion. At the same time, Israel is saying that they are well prepared for the ground assault. And then you've got the Washington Post saying that they're talking about getting all the Americans out if this thing goes sideways.
So I think it's important to also note that we're not talking about that Israel are some scrubs off the street that have never fought before. They have been training with American special operations, as well as generals have been on the ground for years. This is not anything new. We're not talking about people that don't know how to battle. I think it's also important to note that the administration is split on strategy, not only from a diplomacy standpoint, but from how they should strike. And it's very interesting that you have people that are openly leaking in the administration to somehow, Brian, I think, pressure Israel from the left side and not to take action on the ground. So I think some of this reporting we have to take with a grain of salt because of the people that are leaking the information.
Well, I think ultimately, though, what they're doing, the administration is saying, hey, Israel's got to take their time because we want to negotiate for hostages. Because there are there are 220 hostages somewhere, they think. And it's all about the hostages
do they delay ground troops because there are 220 hostages there and we want them all to come out safely? But if they do release all 220, they're not going to do that.
They're not going to do it.
If they did, they know then Israel goes in.
All right, they got way more hostages than they thought, and according to those battle plans. Jack Reed is one of the people, Democrat, who says let's delay for more hostage release, but we delay in the public sentiment because it tends to go against Israel, and the longer you delay, the more distant October 7th seems. That's why they're bringing out all these personal stories. We'll see where it goes. But the other thing is you could also find out intelligence where the hostages are and maybe try to grab them in an operation.
Have you all heard anything about why it took so long for IDF or for their military to respond to these kibbutzes that were annihilated?
No, that's part of the investigation.
It took like 9 hours. Absolutely. And how did this even happen?
Right.
How were they able to come over the border? Paragliders?
Well, the prime minister is under a lot of pressure.
They've been training and rehearsing for this for at least a year.
Right. And in a Hamas terrorist video that was taken off one of the body cams, they played it for reporters like Trey yesterday. And apparently the plan had been to take over towns they attacked and hold positions once they killed and kidnapped the residents. And I mentioned this a moment ago. One terrorist told Israeli forces, whoever brings a hostage back to Gaza gets $10,000 and an apartment.
Free rent.
The big question is that apartment still standing?
And you can't forget who these people are. We're talking ceasefire. Some are holding up ceasefire signs at some of these protests. Our president is saying, let's focus on getting the hostages back, but possibly a ceasefire. No, these are the brutal individuals. They are evil. Think about what they did to these women, to these children, to the elderly. It's impossible to do that to a human being unless you were evil.
So the U.S. has been hit by Iran militants twice, 3 times in the last 4 days in Iraq. We had our destroyer go into off the coast of Yemen and have rockets fired at it. We had to knock them down. And then over in Syria, our bases have been hit pretty consistently. No one can believe that we are not answering this back. We're only blocking this. We had one guy die of a heart attack, they say, over in Syria after the attack, but we're doing nothing. As Jack Keane said last hour, we've been attacked 90 times over the last 2 years. We responded 4 times. That is a joke. Look at this.
We have that soundbite from your interview with Jack Keane.
Roll it.
We've been in a defensive mode. In other words, somebody shoots at this, we try to shoot back to defeat whatever that is. Obviously, that's what we must do. But what we need to do is deter them from conducting these attacks. And there's been almost 90 attacks in our bases in Iraq and Syria since this administration took office. and we've only responded a half a dozen times. It's not surprising they're still coming after us. We got to go on the offense. We're not starting World War III. We don't need the hand-wringers out there interpreting that. We're talking about protecting American lives that are overseas. And it's not just enough to shoot at a drone that's shooting at you or to shoot at an incoming missile. We got to take away the capability for them to do that.
And Admiral Kirby came out yesterday and says, we will respond at a time of our choosing. We're waiting. It's been 2.5 years. Start choosing.
And to your point, Brian, since January the 21st, there's been 86 attacks on U.S. forces. They've only responded 4 times. And I think the administration position is posture. But you can posture all day. But if you don't actually act, the posture means
nothing.
nothing.
If you have a family member at one of these bases.
And then Rashida Tlaib, y'all heard what she said, the congresswoman. She's tripling down again. She is still doubting that the hospital thing happened within Gaza.
She says Israel did it.
She says Israel did it, yes.
Initially, because she actually repeated what Hamas had said.
There's so much evidence to prove that it was the Islamic Jihad.
Absolutely. And the U.S. intel, Israeli intel, they have provided information. It shows the video of where apparently an Islamic Jihad person inside the Palestinian area shot off a rocket, wound up essentially hitting the parking lot at a hospital. And of course, the headline immediately out of Hamas was they killed 500 people. Well, for the most part, that number reportedly is much lower, but she is sticking with her story that we need to have an independent investigation, she says, because that's what the United Nations is saying.
We've already had our investigation. The Defense Department briefed the president, they briefed Congress as well, and they came up with their own independent analysis as well. She says don't believe them. She prefers Hamas talking points. But it's not just Tlaib. There's a little bit of Tlaibs all in the State Department. AOC. This is what Huffington Post is reporting. There's basically a mutiny brewing within the State Department at all levels. And the State Department is prepared, some in the State Department are prepared to release a dissent cable against their own government. So these are a bunch of State Department officials. The president is supposed to set foreign policies, and they're saying openly they disagree with the president of the United States on this position.
AOC is sympathizing with the terrorists, too. She said war crimes don't justify war crimes. And I'm like, someone comes into your house and kills your entire family, you're not allowed to respond back. The New York Times, about the hospital incident, they admitted, quote, we relied too heavily on claims by Hamas about the hospital blast. And then the AP reporters are not even allowed in their reporting to say that Hamas is a terrorist organization.
But you know, the New York Times also, they are culpable. They apologize. Remember the headline? Israel strike kills hundreds in hospital, Palestinians say. Meanwhile, that goes out there. It got tons of views, and that becomes a series of riots. The president of the United States gets his meetings canceled with Jordan, Egypt, and the Palestinian Authority, and it turns out it's erroneous. The videos provided, the intercepts are there for you to hear. Islamic Jihad said, where are you shooting from the cemetery? What did you just hit? Also, the hospital is still standing. They hit the parking lot. You don't hit the parking lot from the...
And if you hit a parking lot, do 500 people die?
No.
There was no crater.
But the thing is, too, fundamentally Israel is not aiming for civilians. Hamas is. They are trying to kill them, dismember them, or they take them hostage.
And Hamas is also using the civilians as shields.
Right. Yeah, that's what they do.
We just can't discount
and Israeli said,
part.
go south.
Right.
That's why they said, bring hostages and we'll give you $10,000.
That's exactly right.
Because that is their protection.
It's a big difference.
All right.